Hello and welcome back to the College of Natural Health Sciences Bermuda, the induction prep course. This is week number 3 for functional anatomy. I tell you, time really does fly. This week's lecture, we will look at Chapter 2 of the Functional Anatomy textbook, and our topic is going to be Osteology and Arthrology. The learning objectives for today's lecture are to identify the functions of bones in the human body, compare and contrast spongy bone and compact bone, describe how tendons and ligaments attach to bones, identify the bones of the human skeleton and distinguish between the axial and appendicular divisions, describe the different types and shapes of bones and relate them to function, identify categories and functions of bony landmarks on the human skeleton, describe how joints in the human body are named and identify all joints in the axial and appendicular divisions of the skeleton, classify the different types of joints in the human body by structure and function and give an example of each, label the basic structures of a synovial joint and summarize the function of each structure in the body, identify the 6 types of synovial joints and provide an example of each. Describe the 3 types of accessory motion and give an example of each. The bones of the human skeleton. Osteology is the study of bones, how they develop and respond to the environment. Bones have specific functions. The first is to support and to protect. The framework that supports soft tissue and protects critical organs, such as the skull, which protects the brain, and the ribs that protect the heart. Movement is another function of bones. Rigid levers on which muscles pull to produce movement. Hematopoiesis is the production of red blood cells. And the 4th function is the storage of fats and minerals, such as calcium and phosphate. Bone tissue can be thought of as a type of supporting connective tissue. Osteocytes, or bone cells, come in 2 types. Osteoblasts are bone-forming osteocytes. They lay down calcium-containing crystals along collagen fiber, known as struts, in the extracellular matrix. Osteoclasts, on the other hand, break down old bone due to changes in stress on the body. They release free chemicals that degrade mineral crystals, releasing stored calcium into the bloodstream. And here we have a microscopic view of bone tissue. Both spongy bone and outer compact bone can be seen in this view. Notice the system of transport canals, including the Hervasian canal, the Volkmann canal, and the tiny canaliculi. The concentric rings of laminae are visible from the top and side views. A single osteon is raised at the top, highlighting the system of bone cells or osteocytes, the cavities that house them, which is the lacunae, the central Hervasian canal, and its corresponding canaliculi. The periosteum forms a protective, connective tissue layer surrounding the bone. The micrograph on the left of spongy bone clearly shows its porous nature. The small dark spots on the micrograph on the right of compact bone are osteocytes within their lacunae. The larger dark areas indicate the central Hervasian canals. So let's talk about spongy bone. Spongy bone is a 3-dimensional latticework of porous bone tissue filled with red bone marrow. It is less dense than compact bone and resembles a sponge. The osseous struts or trabeculi of spongy bone form and reform according to lines of stress. This provides maximum strength like the braces used to support a building. Spongy bone is usually found in the bone core, deep to the compact bone. Nourishment reaches the central spongy bone via a system of blood vessels that emerge from canals within the denser outer compact bone. Let's talk about compact bone. Compact bone is much more dense than spongy bone. Its features are, first of all, the lacunae, the tiny cavities within the bone matrix that house the osteocytes, the lamellae, the concentric rings of the lacunae, the Harvesian canals, which are the central canals through which nerves and blood vessels pass, and the canaliculi. These are the tiny canals that penetrate compact bone's matrix, bringing microscopic blood vessels and nerve branches. The diagram shows the anterior view of the human skeleton. And this is the posterior view. The human skeleton consists of 206 bones. It is divided into two parts. The axial skeleton has 80 bones. It forms the body's axis or center. It includes the bones of the head and the trunk, which is the skull and related bones, the hyoid bone, the sternum, the ribs, the vertebrae, the sacrum, and the coccyx. The appendicular skeleton consists of 126 bones. It is referred to as being appended to the axial skeleton because it is attached to the axial skeleton. And the structures include the shoulder girdle, consisting of the clavicle and the scapula, the upper limb, consisting of the humerus, radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges, the pelvic girdle, consisting of the coxal bone, which is the ilium, ischium, and pubis, and the lower limb, the femur, tibia, fibula, tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges. Now let's consider the shapes of bones. Long bones are longer than they are wide. Examples of long bones include the humerus, the radius, the ulna, the femur, the tibia, the fibula. And divided into two sections, long bones have what is referred to as a diaphysis, which is the shaft, and this consists of compact bone with yellow marrow in the center, and the yellow marrow stores fat. And then we have the epiphysis, or the bumpy ends of a long bone. This consists of spongy bone surrounded by thin layers of compact bone. The humerus is an example of a long bone. We see the long shaft in the middle here, and of course the bumpy ends, the epiphysis. And as we mentioned earlier, the shaft is also referred to as the diaphysis. Short bones are cube-shaped, and they are mainly spongy bone surrounded by a thin layer of compact bone. Examples of short bones are carpal bones found at the wrist and tarsals found at the foot. Networks of short bones allow fine and complex hand and foot movements to occur. The sesamoid bone, as in the patella, is a specialized short bone resembling a sesame seed, and it's formed within tendons. They strengthen the tendon and improve muscle traction mechanics. And here we see illustrated the short bones, the carpals at the wrist. This illustration shows the sesamoid bone, the patella or kneecap. Now let's consider flat bones. Flat bones are thin and, as their name suggests, flattened and curved. Examples of flat bones include the cranial bones, sternum, the scapula, the clavicle, the ribs, and the ilium. Flat bones developed by ossification of a fibrous network and not by hyaline cartilage. They consist of a thin layer of spongy bone surrounded by compact bone once mature. And of course, at the center of spongy bone is the site of hematopoiesis. This diagram illustrates the ilium, which is, of course, a flat bone. So now let's discuss irregular bones. Irregular bones have a very unique shape, and examples of irregular bone include the vertebrae, the ischium, and the pubis. And this diagram illustrates the vertebrae, which have a very irregular shape. We also have what is referred to as wormian bones. Wormian bones are small and irregular, and they are found along the sutures of the cranium. These are areas of ossification outside of the usual cranial bones. They tend to be symmetrical on both sides of the skull, and they vary in size. They are not found in all human skulls. The number is generally limited to 2 or 3. Let's now talk about bony landmarks. Bones have or either develop over time specific landmarks that serve a variety of functions. Each bony landmark has a unique name that helps indicate its purpose and location. For example, we have what are referred to as depressions and openings. Depressions are basins and channels that house muscles, tendons, nerves, and vessels. We have what is referred to as fossa. Fossa are shallow depressions, and these are found at the distal end of the humerus and the ilium. We have the sulcuses or grooves. These are narrow depressions. We find these at the head of the humerus. And then we also have openings. Openings are holes and channels that allow passage of nerves, vessels, muscles, and tendons. The sinuses are air-filled cavities. Fissures are clefts or enlarged cracks or slits in a bone. The foramen are small to large, and they are usually circular openings. And of course, we have the meatus, which is a tiny passageway. Projections are another type of bony landmark that helps to form joints. These are bumps on the ends of bones. Included are condyles, which are rounded, facets, which are flat, heads of long bones, and rami, which are bony bridges. Attachment sites are also another type of bony landmark. These are areas on bone where tendons and ligaments attach. They are long and narrow sites, so they could be in the form of a crest, a line, or a ridge. Also, we have rounded attachment sites, and this could be a tubercle or a tuberosity or a trochanter. And then there are other prominences, such as the epicondyles, the processes, and the spines. And we will look very carefully at the various bony landmarks when we get into the various sites specifically in this course. The study of the joints and how and why joints move is called arthrology. Joints are named according to the bones that form them. Larger and more stable bone is typically named first. For example, the humeral ulnar joint joins the humerus to the ulna. When a bone participates in more than one joint, a joint is named for bony landmark that forms it. Example, the glenohumeral joint, which is the glenoid fossa and the humerus. In our study of joints, let us consider the joint structure. Fibrous joints have firm connections between bones. There is minimal joint cavity and little or no movement possible at the joint site, so it is considered to be very stable. There are three types of fibrous joints. The sutures, which is a continuous periosteal connection between bones. We have syndesmosis, which they are held together by a cord or a sheet of connective tissue. And we have gymphosis. These are the joints where teeth fit into the socket of the jaw. And of course, this diagram features the fibrous joints. Diagram A shows sutures. Diagram B shows the syndesmosis. And diagram C, gymphosis. Let's now consider the joint structure of cartilaginous joints. Cartilaginous joints have slightly more movement than fibrous joints. Cartilage separates articulating surfaces of adjacent bones. Examples are the joints between the vertebrae, the joints between the ribs and the sternum, and the joints at the pubic symphysis. When we consider the joint structure of synovial joints, these are the most mobile joints of all. They are egg-shaped. Ovi means egg. The cartilaginous joints of the human skeleton are illustrated here. The cartilage increases the pliability of these joints, and it allows for very slight movement. In diagram A, the intervertebral disc of the spine are illustrated. In diagram B, the costochondral junctures of the rib cage are illustrated. And in diagram C, the pubic symphysis of the pelvis is illustrated. And here we have an illustration of a synovial joint. Several unique features are present in this type of joint, including a thick joint capsule divided into an outer fibrous capsule and an inner synovial membrane. The synovial membrane produces synovial fluid, reducing friction in the joint cavity. Smooth articular cartilage covers the articulating bone ends to further reduce friction during movement. Ligaments support the fibrous capsule, providing stability to the joint. So now that we have considered the various types of joints, it is important to consider joints in terms of their unique functions. Three specific types of joints have been identified. Synarthrotic joints have little or no movement, such as the pelvic girdle. Amphiarthrotic joints are slightly movable, such as the tibia and the fibula. And diarthrotic joints are freely movable, and these are what we refer to as the synovial joints. Synovial joints have already been identified as diarthrotic joints, which means that they are freely moving. Their anatomy is such that there is articulating bones that are encased in thick joint capsules. There are two parts of the capsule, the fibrous capsule and the synovial membrane. The inner synovial membrane lines the joint cavity and produces synovial fluid, a lubricant that decreases friction. Synovial fluid fills the joint cavity. So we know that all synovial joints have the same basic structures. However, depending on their shape, different movements are possible at the joint. The ball and socket joint consists of a spherical head on one bone, and it fits into a rounded cavity on another. The glenohumeral joint is an example of a ball and socket joint. Hinge joints have a cylindrical prominence on one bone which fits into the depression on another. The humeral ulnar joint is an example of a hinge joint. Pivot joints have cylindrical segments of one bone fitting into the cavity of another, the radial ulnar joint. An ellipsoid joint is similar to a ball and socket joint, but it has an oval-shaped joint surface, such as the radial carpal joints. Saddle joints are convex shaped of one bone fitting into the concave surface of another, the carpometacarpal joint. And then we have gliding joints. These are flat surfaces that allow small planar movements, such as the articular processes of vertebrae. In Chapter 1, we described movement that occurs in the cardinal planes, such as flexion and extension, abduction and adduction. However, when joints move in relation to one another, this is referred to as accessory motions. Joint rule refers to a series of points on one bony surface coming into contact with corresponding series of points on another. Joint glide is a point on one bony surface coming into contact with a series of points on another. And joint spin. This is when one surface rotates clockwise or counterclockwise around a stationary longitudinal axis. Normal accessory motions are necessary for full-range physiological movement to occur. Accessory motions prevent compression and loss of contact between the articulating surfaces of the joint. Diagram A is an example of joint roll. Diagram B is an example of joint glide, while Diagram C is an example of joint spin. So let's summarize the main points of today's lecture. Bones serve 4 primary functions in the human body. They provide support and protection of soft tissue. They are a system of levers for human movement, and they are a site for blood cell formation and a storage of minerals and fats. There are 2 types of bone tissue, spongy and compact. Spongy bone is porous. It arranges in trabeculi according to the lines of stress, and it is the location of hematopoiesis. Compact bone is denser. It tends to surround spongy bone, and it has several unique features, including a system of transport channels. Bones are surrounded by periosteum, which protects and nourishes the underlying structures. The typical human skeleton has 206 bones. The axial skeleton is the head and the trunk, and the appendicular skeleton is the shoulder girdle, the upper extremity, the pelvic girdle, and the lower extremity. Bones come in several shapes, including long bones, short bones, flat bones, and irregular bones. Each shape serves as a unique purpose in the body. Bony landmarks indicate where nerves or blood vessels transverse a bone, where muscles, tendons, or other structures reside, where joints are formed, and where ligaments and tendons attach. Each has a unique name that indicates its function and location. Bones come together to form joints. They are classified according to their structure and function. A specific system of naming joints has been established which combines the names of the two bones forming the joint, connecting them with an O. Joint structures include fibrous, cartilaginous, and synovial, each having unique tissues binding them together. Joints can be classified as synarthrotic, amphiarthrotic, and diarthrotic. Each category has increasing space between joint surfaces and thus increased mobility. Synovial joints allow the most amount of movement in the human body. Synovial joint features include a thick joint capsule and a joint cavity containing synovial fluid. Synovial joints come in several shapes, including ball and socket, hinge, pivot, ellipsoid, also known as condyloid, saddle, and gliding. Each shape has unique movement possibilities. Accessory motion describes movement between joint surfaces. It occurs in conjunction with physiological movements. Accessory motion decreases compression and maintains optimal joint alignment as the body moves. Roll, glide, and spin are the three types of accessory motion. Okay, so we've reached the end of the lecture, and your assignment for this week, it does say assignment number 2 because it's coming from the Functional Anatomy textbook, Chapter 2. But yes, this is week 3. So number 1, you're going to describe the primary functions of the bones in the human body. Number 2, what is the axial skeleton? Number 3, what is the appendicular skeleton? And 4, identify the 6 types of synovial joints and provide an example of each. If anyone is having any difficulty with the course material, remember you can always email me at collegenhsbda@gmail.com to set up a time when we can go over the material during my office hours, which are Thursdays from 4 to 6 p.m. And don't forget to leave a comment at the end of this video, and a like would be nice. And also go ahead and respond to any of your classmates' comments if you see any of them posted. But remember, this does count as the forum portion of your grade for this particular course, okay? So I look forward to receiving your assignments and reading your comments. Do take care.